Добрый день.
Good afternoon. I welcome everyone at the press center of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at our weekly briefing. We begin with the schedule of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. On February the 5th, the Cultural Center of the Main Directorate for International Cooperation under the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs will host a presentation on the investment, economic and tourism potential of the Perm region. The event will feature an exhibition showcasing the achievements of this Russian region in the field of socio-economic development, as well as revealing its unique cultural and historical heritage. Heads of diplomatic missions and representatives of Russian and foreign media outlets have been invited to attend this event. Speeches are planned by Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov and Perm Governor Dmitry Mahonin. That is, of course, not the full information on the schedule. It will be followed up on, it will be updated as more information comes to light, and we will keep you informed as we have been doing systematically. Now, as for the relevant international agenda on the situation around the Ukraine, the Kiev neo-Nazi regime continues to attack civilian targets, terrorizing the peaceful population of Russia. Over the past week, Ukrainian shelling and UAV strikes have been launched against 99 people. Of these, 15 were killed and 84 wounded, including 4 children. At the same time, during the Russia-US-Ukraine talks on resolving the Ukrainian crisis held in Abu Dhabi on January 23rd, 24th, and after them, the armed forces of Ukraine intensified their deliberate attacks on the civilian population, including ambulances. I would like to just mention some of the facts. Let's look at the Belgrade region. On January 21st, 23rd, 7 people were injured in attacks by enemy UAVs in the villages of Arkhangelskoye and Gruskoye Grivoron. On January 23rd, a Ukrainian drone attacked a service bus on the Golovchino-Masacheva highway, injuring 5 people. From January 24th to 27th, a civilian was killed and 2 people were injured in Shebekino by strikes from Ukrainian armed forces drones. On January 24th, the enemy carried out a massive shelling of Belgrade, using 24 rounds of ammunition, including from the HIMARS multiple launch rocket system. On January 25th, after a drone strike in Krasnaya Yuruga, 3 people, including a 5-year-old child, were injured. On January 27th, 2 workers were injured as a result of a drone explosion during restoration work in the village of Novostroyevka Pervaya and in the villages of Zamostye and Zazuli. Drones injured, once again, civilians. This time it was a 7-year-old girl and a truck driver. On January 28th, a civilian was killed and 1 person was injured by drone strikes on cars in the villages of Pogromets and Novaya Tevelzhang, Bryansk region. On January 23rd, 24th, 3 civilians were injured as a result of a kamikaze drone attack in the villages of Aleinikovo, Gorozhanka, and Voronok. On the night of January 25th, the enemy attempted a combined attack on the region using several HIMARS rocket projectiles and 18 drones, all of which were shot down. On January 26th, while repelling an attack by the armed forces of Ukraine with an S-200 anti-aircraft missile, a woman was injured by fragments that fell on a residential area. On January 27th, in the village of Gorytsi, kamikaze drones wounded a civilian. Zaporozhye region. On January 24th, the Ukrainian armed forces drone targeted an ambulance in Energodar that was responding to an emergency call. Fortunately, the doctors and driver were not injured. On the same day, a teenager and 3 men were injured in drone attacks on 3 civilian vehicles in the Vasilyevsky municipal districts and the city of Vasilyevka. On January 26th, Ukrainian militants deliberately used a drone against an ambulance in Vasilyevka that was transporting a woman injured in another drone attack against the hospital. As a result, 2 medical workers were injured. On the very same day, in the village of Basan, a drone struck a civilian vehicle, injuring a civilian. On January 28th, A woman was killed in a drone attack in Energodar, Kursk region, on January 25th. A 55-year-old woman was injured as a result of a Ukrainian armed forces drone attack on a civilian vehicle on the road between the villages of Mihailovka and Shekina, Kherson region. From January 21st to 23rd, 7 people were injured by drone strikes and shelling in the city of Kakhovka, the villages of Staraya Zburyevka, Nova Zburyevka, and on the Kostogrizova body highway. On January 24th, Ukrainian armed forces militants carried out a targeted attack in Golaya Pristin on an ambulance carrying a team of 3 medics from the Aloshinskaya Central District Hospital who were responding to a call about a seriously ill patient. All of them were killed. We made a corresponding comment following the tragedy. On the same day it happened, at the same time, Ukrainian terrorists struck a clinic in the city of Kakhovka. Fortunately, there were no casualties. On January 27th, a civilian was wounded as a result of ammunition being dropped from a drone in the village of Staraya Zburyevka. They all received punishments for all these crimes. Russian law enforcement agencies continue to bring Ukrainian war criminals and foreign mercenaries to justice. Life imprisonment was given to Ahmadjon Hurbanov after being found guilty of committing on December 17, 2024, a terrorist attack which resulted in the deaths of Igor Kirillov, commander of the Russian Armed Forces Radiation, Chemical and Biological Protection Troops, and his assistant Ilya Polikarpov. 3 other accomplices in the crime received long prison terms. Robert Safaran, who received 25 years, Baduhant achieved 22 years, and Ramazan Paziv 18 years. The investigation into other accomplices in the terrorist attack who are wanted internationally, including 1 Ukrainian citizen residing in the EU, is ongoing. Finnish mercenary Harry Vaisinen, who participated in combat operation as part of the armed forces of Ukraine, was sentenced in absentia to 14 years in prison. He has been placed on the international wanted list. Ukrainian militant Leonid Chepi was sentenced to 23 years in prison in March 2022 on the orders of Leonid Anupka, a commander previously sentenced to life imprisonment, who shot 2 civilians with a grenade launcher in the village of Myrny, Mariupol. They died on the spot from their injuries. The case against the commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Unmanned Systems, Robert Brovdy, has been referred to court. On March 26, 2025, he gave the order to detonate an explosive device planted on a highway in the Kursk region, which resulted in injuries to a film crew from Channel 1. Correspondent Anna Prokofyeva was killed, and the cameraman and accompanying persons were injured. Other accomplices in this crime are being identified. Against this backdrop, Zelensky continues his tour, although last week, apparently remembering he has compatriots, he stated that he would not be visiting Davos. First of all, he received a refusal for some meetings, and he presented it as his lack of desire to visit Davos due to his being unable to leave Ukraine as it finds itself in a difficult situation. But he did say it was not his fault, and he and his team, he did not mention how they are behind the current situation in the energy crisis in Ukraine. But as soon as the chance arose for a conversation with the White House host, he instantly forgot about the suffering of millions of his compatriots and immediately rushed to Switzerland for an audience with Trump. And the conversation with the American leader apparently inspired him so much that afterwards he began to reproach his European allies for their passivity and indecision in the face of the mythical Russian threat, calling on them to unite to increase pressure on Russia. As he said, it's necessary to step up sanctions, continue to arm themselves to the teeth. Do you recall how they were high on proving that Russia is not eager to achieve peace, but no one mentioned how Zelensky is not eager to achieve peace. At the same time, Zelensky mentioned Kyiv's readiness to show Europeans how to fight our country. For example, Once again, his words, by sinking Russian Navy ships off the coast of Greenland or destroying Russian missile production plants, he openly pushed his own sponsors to take adventurous action against the Oreshnik missile complex located in Belarus. Just listen, I will provide his direct quote. Act now, on land, in the air, at sea. But he forgot to mention, act just like Ukraine, you will receive the same result. To build a new global order. He already achieved in building a new local order, so I believe he knows what he's talking about. A new global order cannot be built with words alone. Europe must build a better world, and of course a world without wars, he added. But for this, Europe needs strength, as he says. We're ready to become part of a Europe that really matters and has tangible great power. Today we need this power, said Zelensky, to protect our own independence. But you also need Ukraine's independence, he went on, in appealing to the EU. Because tomorrow, you, I believe he's referring to Western Europeans, may have to defend your way of life. I'm scared to ask against whom. Who exactly will they have to protect their way of life against? Was he referring to Greenland, perhaps? And, as he went on, when Ukraine is with you, I believe it's with the EU, no one will wipe their feet on you. End of quote. Well, it appears that they will simply be wiping their feet on Ukraine and will no longer tread mud on their boots to European Union. In short, it's not just the nonsense of a madman, it's the madness of an aggressive madman. Is aggressive rhetoric once again was present, and surely there isn't any desire for peace here. What other figures is Zelensky painting in the political discourse? From Davos, he moved on to Vilnius, where on January 25th, in the format of the Lublin Triangle, he met with the presidents of Lithuania and Poland, as well as the so-called, as they love calling it, leader. That's what they call it, of the Belarusian opposition, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. She has different nicknames. She goes from being the leader of the opposition to the representative of the Belarus as a whole, but this time with the leader of the opposition. The formal reason for these meetings was the commemorative events marking the 163rd anniversary of the start of the Polish uprising of 1863-1864. Astonishing what kind of pretext united them, because this event is notorious to any unbiased historian or anyone who truly cares for history for the rebels' brutal terror against peasants and Orthodox priests. These uprising aimed to revive the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and encompassed the Kingdom of Poland, Lithuania, and the Grodno and Vilnius regions, which were partially or completely located on the territory of modern Belarus. Kiev had nothing to do with those events, but for Zelensky, that doesn't matter. All he cares about is to keep up with his Russophobic buddies and get their support in the fight against Russia. And here, any means is good. As for others and what they felt, and here I mean Tikhanovskaya, as for the commemoration of date when her predecessors suffered terror, that's quite curious. It was also announced that Lithuanian universities would join the so-called Global Coalition for Ukrainian Studies, an initiative by Bankova to study Ukraine from the perspective of the myth of so-called centuries of enslavement, as they call it, by the Russian Empire. You know, I believe this is clearly a case of collective Russophobic indoctrination. The Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, highlighted some details of another event on his social media account on the X platform, highlighting the event that took place in Europe on the informal EU summit held in Brussels on January 22nd. According to him, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen presented EU leaders with a roadmap for Ukraine's development. You see, everyone continues to contribute to someone's development, so he tells the West how they should develop when it comes to Ukraine. And the Western Europe is sharing with Zelensky how Ukraine should develop from the point of view of Western Europe. So this roadmap, which provides for the fulfillment of all of Kyiv's demands, accelerated accession of the country to the EU in 2027, allocation of 800 billion euros for its post-conflict reconstruction, 700 billion euros for military aid over 10 years, and additional funding for the period up to 2040, just as small expenses. Of course, Budapest will not pay for this, as the leaders stated. Clearly, the EU leadership is determined to continue to indulge the neo-Nazi regime of Zelensky, which is mired in large-scale corruption. Brussels' policy of using Ukraine as an anti-Russian springboard, which runs counter to the interests of ordinary Europeans, remains the only narrative that they're sticking with to this day. And in Ukraine on January 22nd, they celebrated the Unity Day, a holiday that was established in honor of the signing on January 22nd, 1919, of the Act of Reunification of the Ukrainian People's Republic and the West Ukrainian People's Republic. This so-called event was purely symbolic, since by the end of 1919, this new entity had ceased to exist. History shows that the leadership of the Directory of the Ukrainian People's Republic, which announced the aforementioned so-called act, did not even control half of the territory of the supposedly united country at that time, as they referred to it back in the day. The left bank was almost completely under Bolshevik control. Many areas in the south were controlled by the troops of Nestor Makhno and other Ottomans. The Entente forces were stationed in the Black Sea region, and the Poles occupied significant territories in the west. And literally 2 weeks after the pompous proclamation of the so-called Act of Unification, that they're now celebrating as some fated event, the Director and its troops fled Kiev, which was entered on February 5th, 1919 by Red Army regiments under the command of Nikolai Shorts and Vasily Bozhenko. So since 1999, Kiev had decided to celebrate Unity Day at the state level as a symbol of the country's unity. So they found something to unite around. Same as the Ukrainian anthem, not to be united by flourishment or development, but by something else. So here we're witnessing the same case. They found a symbol that didn't even last an ordinary period of time. It immediately crumbled in 1919. And just last Thursday, on January 22nd, so-called celebrations for this occasion took place mainly in the western regions of Ukraine. And they celebrated both Unity Day and the 108th anniversary of the proclamation of independence of the Ukrainian People's Republic, completely forgetting that it was the head of its territory, Petlura, who surrendered Galician Volhynia to the Poles. This is such a stark, horrific compilation of nonsense that is being presented to the people as an event that I find it really hard to understand who is getting these ideas, who comes up with the ideas of these events. Perhaps they're not in Ukraine. The organizers of the celebrations also stayed silent about another participant in the union. Although little people paid attention to this, the celebrations were not particularly large scale. The exception was Lvov, where around 200 people, mainly local students, gathered. All this is not surprising. People are busy not only many social and everyday problems, but are simply trying to survive in the conditions of a brutal police dictatorship raging in the country. They clearly have no time for holidays or celebratory events, especially those imposed by local authorities on dubious historical dates. And what kind of unity can we talk about when Zelensky regime continues to divide society due to linguistic, national, religious, and class lines, imposing on it an alien neo-Nazi ideology based on historical lies, the cult of false symbols, and contempt for its own people. And all this he is allowed to do, and all this is aided by the cultural censorship in Ukraine. On January 21st, Ukrainian media published the response of the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture regarding the participation of leading soloists of the National Opera of Ukraine, People's Artists of Ukraine, Natalia Mataka and Sergey Kuznetsov, in performances of Swan Lake during their vacation abroad. They dared to participate in the classic ballet. And what do you think? What was the verdict of the regime? It was the following. And this is the official position of the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture. The renegades promoted, now is a direct quote, the product of an aggressor country, violating, once again a direct quote, the theater's general principled position on excluding works by Russian composers from its repertoire. The Ministry of Culture also announced that it was preparing decisions within the framework of labor legislation, apparently referring to the dismissal of the artists. Once again, what for? For simply as the artists of classical ballet, in their free time, they participated in the Swan Lake Ballet. If you heard this as a passing funny story, you would laugh at it because you would think it's nothing but a product of imagination. It's only imaginable in funny stories, and in Ukraine this is nothing more than another example of primitive diversification imposed by the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev in all spheres of life. You know, I believe that they should follow through. When will they cancel the Mendeleev table in every sense? Because it's also a product of an enemy. How do we behave when Tchaikovsky is cancelled? Why are they not cancelling Mendeleev and his inventions? What is the nature of this? If they're truly taking a look at things, perhaps they should step away from this nonsense. But if they believe that staying dedicated in this track, then denazification, derussification, and then they decided that they're fighting imperialism. But if this is their true strategy, perhaps it should be applied everywhere. Why are they being selective? Where does it come from? That's because they understand they could lead to canceling themselves, including in those areas of life that are crucial and are fateful. But for now, there's still space to move around. They can cancel Tchaikovsky, they can prohibit Bulgakov, dismantle the commemorative tables to Tchaikovsky. But with Mendeleev, this could go on. The above facts confirm the relevance of the tasks of denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of threats emanating from its territory. As the Russian leadership stated, all these goals will definitely be achieved.
So here a surprising, actually bewildering statement, not only by the UN Secretariat, but it's coming from Secretary General of the United States. On the 29th of January, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres made an extremely strange statement about the principle of independence not being applicable to the situation with the Crimea and Donbass. It was after a thorough studying of this issue, as if if we quote him. But that's the process we have mentioned before, where the personnel staffing of the UN Secretariat, people have been selected not according to their qualification and professionalism, but according to quotas at a certain stage. That gender tolerance implemented at a certain stage when professional figures were secondary, were at the third or at the last place. The main thing was political ideological compatibility, and the result is obvious. It seems that the UN lawyers do not exactly understand their tasks. They have not studied the Charter of the United Nations carefully, because the scope of the UN Secretary General does not include that state ownership of territories, but according to Article 100 of the Charter, they need to observe the principle of independence and abstain from any actions that could influence the position of international officials responsible only before the organization. Article 97 of the UN Charter also calls upon refraining from such engaged political statements and selective interpretation of the norms of the Charter. Incompetence in international law is obvious. I beg your pardon, but even the students of legal faculties know that there is no hierarchy in the principles of international law, and no law can prevail over another. This principle is enshrined in the Charter and in the Declaration on International Law Principles of 1970. The mentioned declaration includes the principle of territorial integrity that is so actively mentioned by Antonio Guterres, and the Office of Human Rights. They just not respect the principle of respect of the population residing on that territory, and that coup d'etat and Russophobic statements, they did not represent the Crimean, Donbass and Novorossiya residents. It was true genocide of the peaceful population of Donbass and erasing its Russian identity. Stefan Dujarric, official representative of the UN Secretary General, he said that the UN recognized the right of the people of Greenland for its self-determination. Actually, he distinguishes which people have certain rights. The Secretary General has turned into a conveyor of Western propaganda, actually. So what can we expect from Eleanor Hammarskjöld, a Swedish national? The state adhering to Russophobic policy. They ignore the principle of neutrality on which the authority of the UN is based. She is not aware of that, obviously. Now regarding the situation in Moldova, as the authorities of that country continue to adhere to anti-Russian policy, and Maya Sandu made a statement during peace session, allegedly Russia having only one goal: to capture the parliament of the country, to establish the government controlled by the Kremlin, to destroy democracy, to engage it into the sphere of influence against Ukraine and against Europe. It's a quotation. Actually, it was a hypocrisy. It was called hypocritical in Moldova itself. They just ignored the horrible situation in socio-economic sphere and the situation with human rights. She only hears the European elites. They pay her and they are ready to prolong her credit further. As they say, it's a European anti-Russian project in essence. Brussels just prefers to hide its real result because it has been detrimental for Moldova. The country has been turned into an impoverished police state. If you need examples, but I think everyone sees that, everyone feels that actually, but I will cite an example. Contrary to the Sandu regime, we are ready to provide examples for our statements, real examples. It's the deprivation of autonomy status of Gagauzia. As you know, the head of the autonomy, Evgeny Gutsul, has been sentenced to 7 years in prison. And the former head of the National Assembly of Gagauzia, Dmitry Konstantinov, has been sentenced to 12 years of imprisonment. Actually, elections to Gagauz parliaments planned for 22nd of March were disrupted when the Supreme Court Chamber of Chisinau, it actually deprived the election commissions of Gagauzia of its authority. It's just further breaking, creating, splitting the Moldovan society. According to the National Bureau of Statistics from January to November 2025, the import to Moldova grew by 20% in comparison with the similar period in 2024, and export grew a little bit more than by 4%. That's how Chisinau is expected, awaited in the European Union, as they say. Its market has long been divided. And what they need to do is to find a new market for selling their own products and not to allow future competitors to that market. Actually, the Moldovan authorities, they deny, they just hide this option for themselves. They're just depriving their own producers of oxygen. The situation in energy is very complicated. The tariffs grew by 70% in 2024. Since 2021, the growth has been 150%. Regarding the renewable energy sources generation, Moldova has no money for such projects financing, because their main donor, the European Union, is not interested in the energy independence of the country. And Brussels decreased the amount of grants for Moldova for supporting the energy sector by 30%, according to some data. And experts conclude that Chisinau no longer depends on the Russian gas. They are proud of that, you see, but the remaining figures, I have cited them. Moldova has become yet another example that Russophobia is expensive and pointless. It's a road to nowhere, literally. We have drawn attention to certain statements by Volker Türk, Austrian representative, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Those statements were made on the 23rd of January during the 39th special session of the UN Council, Human Rights Council. It was for discussion of the worsening human rights situation in Iran. It was dedicated to pressure on Iran by the West, with the aim of worsening the economic situation in this country and stimulating the discontent of the Iranians. This session was devoted to the human rights situation in Iran. In itself, it sounds strange. A notable fact is that Volker Türk, as the UN Office for Human Rights, headed by him, in the states that are not favorable to the collective West, they draw attention to them, and apart from dubious assessments and statements, the UN official underlined that the recent protests were due to sharp growth in prices and the detrimental influence of foreign sanctions. I would like to draw attention once again to hypocrisy of Western countries who allegedly protect democracy, but actually it's just a rhetorical method concealing their predator neo-colonial policy for their dominance, preserving their dominance in the world. The unilateral economic measures imposed by them are aimed exclusively against the so-called authoritarian regime. Allegedly, they do not affect the population of those countries, but actually they do affect them, and that's what they are accounting for. The situation in Iran has demonstrated that such restrictions, this burden, is borne by common civilians whose quality of life and health directly depends. It is actually hit directly by those Western sanctions. It is done purposefully, slowly, for stifling Iran's national economy. It's a just and a relevant call of Iran to international security, to international community, to lift those sanctions affecting the well-being of the Iranian people. So we hope that they will review their killing policy with regard to the Iranian people and operate real facts, and do not use human rights issues just for concealing the changing of regimes, the policy of changing regimes. Now let us have a look at the issue of how the West cares about human rights when they need to implement the legislation under different pretexts, but with the aim of such political pressure. They forget about human rights in those cases. On the 21st of January this year, German law enforcement authorities detained Russian citizen Suren Avdzhyan. He is charged with supplying humanitarian and other cargoes to Donbass, including clothing, medicine, as well as transferring money for humanitarian purposes as well. Our citizen is accused of supporting foreign terrorist organizations, which German law enforcement officials have called Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. Such interpretation, we consider it legally null and void. It goes for humanitarian shipments. The Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics are the regions that have become part of the Russian Federation. We think that such actions are outrageous, such actions by the German authorities. We demanded that the German side provide immediate consular access to the detained Russian citizen, and we aim to protect his rights and interests. Such persecution of Russian citizens has become systemic and aimed at intimidating our compatriots and demonizing our country in the eyes of the German public. But I would like to ask a question to the official Berlin. What about human rights? It's about those who need that assistance, humanitarian assistance. They have been in need for many years. It seems like it has been the Red Cross Committee, some other humanitarian organizations acting there. How is it linked to human rights and the international obligations, commitments of Berlin? On the 27th of January, the Riga District Council sentenced prominent Russian-speaking scholar, publicist, and human rights activist Alexander Gaponenko to 10 years in prison. I would underline that, to 10 years in prison. What for? For participation in a conference. Maybe they thought he came to a conference, he did something else during that conference, was not only engaged in statements, in speeches, public activities. The problem was, it was an online conference, for participation in an online conference. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The Riga District Court, it's a shame. What was the name of this online conference? Maybe someone doubts. Maybe it was dedicated to how to create some explosive device for destruction of civilians. Maybe someone has such doubts. Maybe it was dedicated to some manifestation of xenophobia, segregation, human rights violation. No, it was on the contrary. It was dedicated to analyzing of what is connected with violations of human rights, genocide, and so on, and not allowing such cases. It was called the ethnocide of Russian compatriots in Baltic states. It was held by CIS Institute on the 4th of February. And however, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. We think that those charges are fabricated. It was just ordered by the ruling regime. It's a very tragic issue that a person has been imprisoned who has poor health, who is quite an elderly man, and he cannot receive medical aid, and he would need regular medical aid, but it's a terror, manifestation of terror, and an attempt to make him keep silent, and the aim of this persecution is to stifle any policy of any discontent with the policy of ethnocide, and it's he was about his statements were about the state using law in order to destroy those who think differently. It's a test for readiness. Those who qualify themselves as parents of human rights and humanity in general. The readiness to observe in silence how the Russian presence in Europe is methodically destroyed. Are those who, I would repeat that, state their adherence to human rights, are they ready to tolerate that? Latvia sends a precise signal. Any policy of discontent will be qualified as a state crime. We will seek the release of political prisoners languishing in prisons in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. We will continue that. We will continue to draw attention to this issue publicly as well. Now we would add to the issue of justice in Western European countries. The German court decision that has confirmed the legality of the arrest of Ukrainian citizen Sergey Kuznetsov, extradited last year by Italian authorities to the German courts on suspicion of involvement in the destruction of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Many have asked to comment on that. The Kiev regime has long been a sponsor and organizer of various terrorist attacks. That includes the Crocus City Hall attack, the bombing of the Crimean Bridge, murders of prominent political figures, deliberate strikes, drone strikes against civilians, and much more. Regarding this terrorist attack, actually it's killing of children by different methods, also Lepistok mines in order to maim as well to cause harm to civilians. And it was just preparation or just concealing, covering up the tracks. It all requires investigation and punishment to those involved in that crime. It falls within the scope of the International Convention against bombings and the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism. It was a civilian target attack, civilian infrastructure sites, and the perpetrators were not combatants and were not participants in military operation. I would like to remind that Chancellor Scholz qualified the explosions of Nord Stream pipelines as terrorist attacks. So it falls within the scope of the mentioned conventions. Also, the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism, in which Russia, Germany, Italy, Poland, Ukraine, and several other countries are parties, it obligates member states to provide each other with maximum assistance in investigating terrorist crimes. But Poland, on the contrary, creates obstacles to find the perpetrators. And we hope that Warsaw will meet its obligations according to the convention. The Russian side will continue to closely monitor the situation surrounding Sergey Kuznetsov and Vladimir Zhuravlov, who are charged with the Nord Stream explosions, and we will not believe that it's only the Ukrainians who are behind the explosions of Nord Stream pipelines. This investigation is still on the agenda, and Western intelligence agencies' involvement needs to be checked, and our country takes the necessary procedural steps in that area.
As for Japan, we continue to work on publishing information about the war crimes committed by militaries Japan. We have been doing this for several years, yet new information on this issue continues to emerge, testifying to the scale of the tragedy experienced by the peoples of Asia and with them our country as a result of the actions of the Japanese militarists. In September and November 2025, the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation issued resolutions to overturn the 1990s convictions of 14 Japanese citizens. We will include the names in the text version of the briefing. During the war and even after Japan's surrender in 1945, they participated in sabotage and espionage activities directed against the Soviet Union. Following a review of court decisions in the cassation and supervisory instances, it was established that the individuals in question are not eligible for rehabilitation, and their guilt has been fully proven. As an example of the inhumanity of the crimes committed, I can note that a number of the individuals on this list tortured persons suspected of having ties to Soviet intelligence. In addition, one of the above-mentioned Japanese nationals was directly involved in preparing operations to use biological weapons on the territory of the USSR and Mongolia. The work to uncover and publish the crimes of militaries Japan will continue. As for the procedure of ratifying by Russia of the UN Convention against Cybercrimes, one of Russia's current priorities, as you're well aware, in the field of international information security is the early entry into force of the UN Convention against Cybercrime signed on October 25, 26, 2025 in Hanoi, which requires a minimum of 40 ratifications. The implementation of the provisions of the treaty developed on the initiative of our country after its ratification will strengthen international law enforcement cooperation in combating crimes committed using information and communication technologies, combating hacking of ICT systems, money laundering, distribution of illegal materials, content involving minors, so on and so forth. It will also enhance Russia's authority as a supporter of international legal solutions based on the principles of the UN Charter. Russia has begun the process of ratifying the treaty. This involves preparing a package of documents and reviewing the text of the convention for compliance with our country's legislation. The implementation of the provisions of the convention will require specific amendments to existing laws, for example, the criminal code. The issue of introducing such amendments is the subject of upcoming painstaking work with the relevant state authorities. On January 19th, representatives of the Advisory Council, Provisional Government of Bangladesh, the UN World Food Programme, the Russian Embassy, and Uralhem joint stock company held a ceremony to transfer 30,000 tons of domestically produced potash fertilizers to the Bangladeshi side as humanitarian aid. The event was attended by the head of the Ministry of Agriculture of Bangladesh, Mohammad Jahangir Alam Chaudhuri, who thanked the Russian side for these much-needed support. The Russian initiative to transfer mineral fertilizers blocked in the ports of Latvia, Estonia, Belgium, and Netherlands to the poorest countries free of charge was announced, as you know, back in September 2022. The humanitarian cargo could have arrived in Bangladesh earlier had it not been blocked by the Latvian authorities, who held it in the port of Riga for several years. Now, as for history, February of 1943, you know, that's when the Battle of Stalingrad ended, changing history and turning the tide of World War II. This memorable date is widely celebrated not only in our country, but also in many countries around the world. The defensive phase of the operation lasted from July 17th to November 18th, 1942, and on November 19th, 1942, the defenders of the city went on the offensive. By the end of January 1943, the 6th German Army, under the command of Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, numbering more than 300,000 men, which included the Croatian Infantry Regiment, with the flanks secured by troops allied with the Third Reich, Romania, Italy, and Hungary, was trapped in a small area in the ruins of Stalingrad. And on February 2nd, they surrendered. The Red Army's victory on the Volga thwarted Hitler's plans to capture the Caucasus and break through to the Middle East. It paved the way for success in the Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943 and brought our allies closer to opening a second front in the summer of 1944. In honor of the heroic defense of the city, the Medal for the Defense of Stalingrad was established on December 22, 1942, and it was awarded to more than 700,000 participants in the battle. 112 most distinguished soldiers became heroes of the Soviet Union. The defeat of the Nazis at Stalingrad had a profound impact on the foreign policy and diplomacy of the USSR, contributing to a significant strengthening of the Soviet Union's international position. And it can be said that a large number of countries became even more eager to strengthen their relations with the USSR as one of the great powers that would have a decisive influence on the parameters of the post-war order. A crisis began in the pro-fascist regimes in Italy, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. Germany's influence over its satellites weakened sharply, and disagreements between them became noticeably more acute. The boundless courage of the defenders of Stalingrad aroused admiration abroad and became a powerful stimulus in the struggle of the peoples of the anti-Hitler coalition for victory over their common enemy. On February 5, 1943, just 3 days after the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, the US President Franklin Roosevelt called it an epic struggle, the decisive outcome of which was celebrated by all Americans. That was his words. In a letter later sent to Stalingrad on behalf of the American people, he emphasized that the strength of spirit and self-sacrifice of the city's valiant defenders will forever inspire the hearts of all free people. Those who forgot about Stalingrad in the West. Did you cease being free? That is the question you will inevitably have to answer. Not to us, but to yourselves. Speaking in the House of Commons on February 11, 1943, Winston Churchill declared that the Battle of Stalingrad was the greatest defeat in the entire military history, speaking of the German army. On November 26, 1943, during the Tehran Conference, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, on behalf of George VI, and in the presence of US President Franklin Roosevelt, presented Supreme Commander Stalin the sword, which later became one of the most famous exhibits of the State Historical and Memorial Museum Reserve Battle of Stalingrad. And the double-edged blade is engraved with an inscription in Russian and English written by Churchill himself. Now allow me to quote what is written there. To the citizens of Stalingrad, strong as steel from King George VI, as a token of the deep admiration of the British people. End of quote. Following the victory at Stalingrad, the consistent, coordinated, and complementary actions of our country's military and diplomats ultimately led to the final victory in the war, allowing us to defend the freedom, independence, and sovereignty of our country, as well as achieve a just post-war settlement. In Supreme Commander Order Number 20 of May 1st, 1945, Stalingrad was named a hero city for the very first time. The title was officially established as a state award on May 8th, 1965, by a decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR. Stalingrad was awarded the highest award of the USSR, the Order of Lenin, and the Gold Star Medal. February 2nd, 1943, in accordance with Federal Number 32, Avdzhyan of March 13th, 1995, on days of military glory and memorable dates in Russia, is celebrated as a day of military glory for Russia, the day the Red Army defeated the German fascist troops in the Battle of Stalingrad, by a decision of the Volgograd City Duma, adopted in 2013 in memory of Volgograd's heroic past. The city annually returns to the name Stalingrad on certain days, under which it entered world history as the city that repelled the fascist invaders. Among these days is February 2nd, the day of the defeat of German fascist troops by Soviet forces in the Battle of Stalingrad. President of Russia Vladimir Putin, speaking on November 18th, 2025, at the key-laying ceremony for the nuclear icebreaker Stalingrad, emphasized, and I quote, "This is yet another tribute to the memory and unyielding courage of the defenders and residents of the Volga stronghold, to the valor and bravery of the participants in the grand battle, which in many ways determined the outcome not only of the Great Patriotic War, but also of the entire Second World War, and without exaggeration, influenced the fate of humanity." Another important page of our history. Every year on the first Saturday of February, a day of remembrance is traditionally observed for diplomatic couriers who died in the line of duty. This memorable date is tied to the events that took place in February 1926 in Latvia. On February the 5th, two diplomatic couriers from the People's Commissariat for Foreign Affairs of the USSR, Theodor Yanovich Nette and Ivan Adamovich Mahmastal, were traveling in a train carriage from Moscow to Riga. The couriers were attacked by bandits. Nette was killed after shooting the first attacker, but the seriously wounded Mahmastal managed to defend the diplomatic mail. He delivered the mail to Riga, handing it over to an employee of the Soviet embassy, whom he knew personally, on the station platform. Only then did he allow himself to be hospitalized. Theodor Nette was buried on February the 9th, 1926, in the large alley of the Vagankovka cemetery in Moscow. Since then, every February, employees of the Department of Diplomatic and Courier Communications and their families come to the cemetery to honor Netta's memory and pay their respects at the graves of their former colleagues. Streets in various cities, an airplane and a steamship have been named after Theodor Nette, who was immortalized in a poem by the outstanding Soviet poet Vladimir Mayakovsky, who was friends with him. A multi-purpose vessel belonging to the Northern Sea Shipping Company has been named after Yagan Mahmastal in memory of the employees who died during the Great Patriotic War. The names of the diplomatic couriers who fulfilled their official duties at the cost of their own lives during the war are inscribed on a memorial plaque in the high-rise building of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Overall, there are 25 names on the mournful list of diplomatic couriers who died in the line of duty in modern conditions. Despite the introduction of radio and space communications, the internet, and other achievements of scientific and technological progress, diplomatic courier communications remain one of the most reliable. The success of their service depends largely on the selection of personnel, the human factor. Diplomatic courier is an unusual position. It requires enormous responsibility for the safety and integrity of entrusted state secrets and is associated with high risk. Many diplomatic couriers are still forced to operate in extreme circumstances today. They are awarded state and departmental honors for their courage and sound decisions, and most importantly, for keeping diplomatic mail safe. And now I'm ready to answer your question. Is the International Life with us today? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. You've already mentioned this week the matter that I want to bring up. Yet, I would like to once again hear your opinion. And here I mean the matter of the President of Poland, Nawrocki, who was making the address at the commemorative ceremony in the concentration camp ceremony, has admitted the fact that the Soviet soldiers liberated the concentration camp, but he still made quite a controversial statement that the 7,000 survivors who survived in 1945 saw liberation in the faces of Soviet soldiers, but at the same time, freedom did not await them outside those camps. How could you comment those words? You see, we've already commented these words, but I would also like to say that all this should be reviewed considering the action of the Polish politician in falsifying history. You see, in Poland, the process of bringing the events of the past to the necessary, comfortable format, and who exactly decides that? This is the meeting circles in Warsaw, making it politically comfortable. It goes against the current policy. As for the education, he has a historical background, and he participated in what we refer to as rewriting history. So the aforementioned quote is nothing but cultivating Polish elites, and this will play a bad joke against them. And I'm not laughing at it, I'm just stating facts. After Polish politicians launched a war against the memorials and trying to destroy anything connected to Russia and the Soviet Union, it's hard to expect from Polish politicians anything but actions like this when it comes to liberating Poland, Europe. But the world majority does not question the role of the Red Army in liberating Europe from the Nazism as a whole. That is why the whole world memorizes the day when the Soviet soldiers brought freedom to the prisoners of the Auschwitz death camp. And this is the International Day of Holocaust survivors. And I would like to recall our position remains unchanged, and we will not allow to change the fact that it was Soviet liberating soldiers who brought to the European people freedom from the Hitler enslavement. They brought back their lives, physical lives, and life with dignity. And another question. Recently, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban stated that he personally and other members of his cabinet received direct threats from Ukrainian authorities. Allow me a quote: "The Ukrainian government is threatening us, not the country, but the members of the government and me personally," he said. And he explained that Kyiv is interested in the shift of power in Hungary, as its current government will not allow Ukraine to join the EU and will not support it financially. How could you characterize the actions of the Kyiv regime? You see, I would like to say that those are not baseless statements. I'd like to recall that in 2022, he was included in the Mirotvorets list of Ukraine, so he was announced as the target of the Kyiv regime and its militants. They published personal data of those who Kyiv deems as enemies of the regime and who should be eliminated. Those are their words. And they still contain information as for the head of Slovakia, Fice, who had an attempted murder on May 15, 2024. Luckily, he survived, but they're still on that list. EU countries now are starting to more reasonably understand and assess the actions of Zelensky. Not everyone, but they start to understand the terrorist nature and the methods that he uses that are condoned by the West, and the barbarian methods he used when it comes to interstate communication. Now, at least it's being brought up in discussions. Thank you. Thank you so much. Is Ria News with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Christina Rodriguez, Ria News. If you allow, we also have two questions today. First, Ambassador had a list of participants of the platform of Russian democratic forces at the assembly. How does Russia assess this initiative of the assembly on creating the so-called platform of opposition? You see, I believe it's long overdue. I don't understand why they haven't done it before. They should around the prize of the former worker and to award it to anyone unworthy. I believe that is what they're doing. They just haven't formalized it in any way. And it's just that a lot of people, most of whom have been sentenced or an international wanted list, so anyone who commits illegal acts or break the law, and they definitely go against the moral and ethics and the law as a whole, the international law as well, calling, among other things, for the violent shift of power in our country, trying to attract political forces, perhaps even financial forces, in order to conduct a coup d'etat. And for some reason, in order to award them and celebrate their prizes, they use decent names. So the prizes that are established in order to celebrate such figures, they use the names of scientists, public figures.
Public figures who have not been noted in hatred towards their own motherland, and people who have signed in hatred towards their motherland. They have admitted not only hating it, but making others hate it. Maybe also physically influencing those who deny to hate it. For all of them, there should be such a prize named after a fugitive Seldon. And now it's another attempt by the Council of Europe to court those fugitive, let us just name them fugitive figures, activists, maybe has such a positive connotation because it's not about activists, it's for those who destroys. Those destroyers are paid by those who suffers from Russophobia, it's obvious, and they're trying to present them as true representatives, as they call them, of the Russian people of Russia, but it's about a group of people, such traveling individuals who are trying to sell themselves for more money, doing some dirty work, political and so on, but they just hate their own country and they get money for that over there. Apart from everything else, I would like to draw your attention, actually, it's difficult to call their activities political. It's not about their beliefs or some actions that lead to so-called political activities. It is an order. They're acting according to the order. Political activities cannot be based exclusively on hatred and namely on hatred towards their own motherland. So they cannot be named some representatives of Russia. Of course not. But regarding the assembly, in its hostile and illegal spirit, it is going deeper and deeper into parallel reality. And it's just striking how they can think in their illegitimate adventures. Apparently, they have nothing else to do. Thank you very much. And the second question. You have already mentioned the complex situations of Russian scientists, but I would like you to comment a case of Russian scientists and highly qualified specialists being declared a threat to national security in Sweden and restrictive measures applied to them. Yes, actually, it's the story is now underway in Sweden, and the country used to state its meeting the standards of democratic society, welfare state. Now there are flagrant violations of obvious cases of human rights violation, desecration of religious symbols, rampant crime, discriminations based on different principles, among other things based on nationality. This also fully applies to the situation of Russian compatriots residing in Sweden. They have just cynically exploited the Russophobic agitation, and it is done with official encouragement by official Stockholm of such approaches. They invent stories of threats to national security, but actually it's very powerfully inspired Russophobia. It's nationalism, actually. What is Russophobia? It's nationalism, and it concerns different spheres of life under the pretext of combating threats to national security. But actually Russia is not threatening. It's actually actions against democracy. And those who have come under the scrutiny of Swedish Big Brother are being denied residence and work permits, denied entry to EU countries for 20 years or more, even more, and chances of appealing the intelligence service decisions in Swedish court are zero, as those decisions are classified as secret and the issues are closed like that. It's not that we were trying to convince our scientists, students, to get that permit somehow, but we just recommend that Russian researchers and highly qualified specialists refrain from moving to this country for educational or professional purposes. We just see how that could end for them. And to voluntarily place their careers at the mercy of the Swedish authorities, who have completely lost their independence and decision-making, it could be reckless, it could be even dangerous. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Vestia with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today, if you allow us. The first question is, how could you comment on information about Russian citizens aged less than 14 years old will not be able to leave Russia? They will just need to have a foreign passport. Yes, it's actually Article 114. It has been amended, and since the 20th of January, yes, this year, the birth certificate is excluded from documents. Based on that, citizens can go to Belarus, Abkhazia, Kyrgyzstan, and South Ossetia. So after the 20th of January 2026, this right is preserved by those children who have left the country, who have left Russia before this date. And since the 20th of January 2026, there is no more possibility to arrange a certificate for return if it has been lost, damaged, or a child has become older than 14 years old during his stay abroad. So those possibilities of a stay and leaving the country of children aged until 14 years old are still active. And there is work conducted to exclude birth certificate from the number of travel documents. And we call upon our citizens, tourist operators, and people who are connected with providing the relevant service to take this information into account when providing such services, when implementing, organizing the trips of citizens abroad. And we call upon our citizens to take this information into account and to timely arrange foreign passports for children. I would like to underline that a passport for children, for a child, can be issued only based on a statement by one of the parents or one of the persons in charge of a child. So our second question is, Slovakia will file a lawsuit to overturn the ban on Russian gas imports to the European Union. What will Russia's response to the ban be? Will countries be able to achieve any results by filing lawsuits in the EU Court of Justice? What alternative solutions does Europe have for gas survival? Actually, on the 26th of January, the EU Council approved the controversial EU regulation banning Russian gas imports no later than November 2027. This Cypriot presidency of the EU Council called this decision, it's very interesting, a direct quote, an important step in the spirit of solidarity and cooperation. But actually they used to voice it, to create their position, to draw attention to that. It's a theater of the absurd. Slovakia and Hungary voted against such regulation and expressed their intention to file a lawsuit against it in the EU Court of Justice, but they were said it's for their own benefit because of the solidarity. As for a possible alternative, the EU is relying on a more expensive and, as experts say, dirty American LNG. The United States is already the key exporter of LNG to the EU. Its share in the EU gas imports is around 27%, 5 times more than in 2027. Furthermore, as part of the EU-US tariff negotiations, An agreement has been reached for the EU to purchase US energy commodities worth $750 billion. That, according to experts, is only possible at prices significantly above market levels. It is predicted that following the implementation of this agreement, the EU share of the EU's gas imports could increase to 40% by 2030, and its share of LNG imports could grow to 80% from the current 57%. Russia has long been successfully redirecting gas supplies towards new centers of global economic growth, primarily in Asia. Should the EU fail to meet the long-term agreements, we intend to pursue our interests with the use of all the tools available to us. Thank you. Thank you. Is Russia Today with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. RT Balkan with you. We have two questions today. Our first question is, how does Moscow regard the plan mentioned by Alexander Vucic, Serbian president, that Ukraine will join the EU in 2027? What signal does this send to other EU candidates? So, can you understand? If you want to be deceived, you can find all the possibilities for that. The European Union and the West as a whole have been deceiving everyone for a long time. Is it not clear? What has been done from what they have promised? Nothing has been done, not only by the EU, but the West as a whole. So why to quote some decisions with regard to some countries, and that's unfair. If there is a specific fact of a failure to meet its obligations by the European Union, by the majority of those they called upon to meet obligations, who they included into their orbit, what has been done from what has been promised? They will deceive Ukraine again. They will deceive everyone who has trusted them. It's not about what the EU promises. It's about the EU promises with regard to Serbia and failure to meet those promises, and no intention to meet them. With regard to Serbia, they have quite a different plan, different from making this country prosperous. The EU policy has discredited itself. It has double standards in its basis. And some candidates just wait in the queue for tens of years, and we cannot fail to notice that, because it's systematic for many years. And a blatant example is, flagrant example is attracting Ukraine into their ranks, and they have just tried this role of a victim, of a fighter against Russia. So you add a fight against Russia, as Ukraine has added, and only in words. Everything is only in words. They can open those doors, they can make promises, but for other countries who have actually approached those standards set as obligatory, no decision has been taken with regard to them. We have experienced the same thing. We used to be approaching a visa-free agreement with the European Union. We have met all our obligations. We were ready to work further. What has been done by the European Union? It has been placed on hold. That is frozen. There were no talks with regard to Ukraine. That was the policy of the European Union. European bureaucrats pushing for Ukraine's politically motivated accession to the EU do not want to consider the real state of affairs in that country: persecution of certain groups based on their ethnic, religious, and political affiliation, a huge public debt. I would remind you $204 billion as of December 2025. And budget deficit, no one is interested in that. It was estimated at $45 billion in 2026. No one is interested in unprecedented, rampant corruption and the black market overflowing with weapons. No one in the EU is interested in that. So what is that? A promising candidate for EU membership? That's what the EU is doing. It's manipulating with the issues of accession by other countries. So what Copenhagen criteria can we talk about here? Clearly, Brussels, which regularly reports on Ukraine's successes, allegedly, in advising along some path, is hypocritical and misrepresenting it's just wishful thinking. So it's the EU citizens who will pay for that, who will bear the burden of maintaining Ukraine with its debts. It's just flagrant that the European countries are waiting in a line for decades. Albania since 2000, North Macedonia since 2004, Montenegro since 2008, that is 17 years, Serbia since 2009, 17 years. So, how can all of that in more detail to prove more convincingly than those facts? Brussels is just eroding the sovereignty of those countries and their national identity, imposes Western-centric ideology, and they still wait in line. They just abandon their own culture, their own ideology, but they continue to stand in that queue. So those countries are also being dragged into a conflict with Russia. They are made to tear the links with our country and with other countries that could put obstacles for the EU countries to impose the absolute hegemony. They call it their standards, but it's for them not to leave some part of independence and sovereignty, for them to abandon all that. Those who are waiting the entry into the EU are used as markets for selling, used as sources of labor for Brussels' convenience. They are used just for that. They are demanded to adhere to the EU decisions, but they are not allowed to participate in the preparation of those decisions. And the decisions are imposed to those candidates. They are not in accordance with the domestic legislation of those countries. It's not just double standards. It's just some beastly, unrealistic actions, and they just remain in the tail of those Euro integration processes. So thank you. Thank you very much. And my second question.
If you will allow, once again, I would like to go back to the issue of preserving the historical memory and how the grateful Europe remembers history. It's hard to get used to the fact that our allies have forgotten that the Red Army had liberated them from Nazism and the price that our people has paid. As I am aware, the European Parliament, on the day of the Holocaust Remembrance Day, the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the High Representative of the European Union on the Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas, who have mentioned as for who and how liberated Europe. How could you comment that fact? Thank you so much. Once again, the leadership of the European Union have showcased that they're rewriting history as they go. They cancel the historic memory. I believe that they have been doing it for years. This is yet another show from them. And the anniversary of Auschwitz, the head of European Commission Ursula von der Leyen mentioned 6 million victims of Holocaust, women, men, and children of Jewish descent, as well as other innocent victims of the Nazi regime. He has not mentioned a single word as for who has broken the backbone of the Third Reich. As for the machine of destruction created in Central Europe, as for who was behind stopping that machine and destroying it, we see the taboo around this subject as a whole. And we see how Madame von der Leyen has decided to focus on the context of some manipulation and not concentrating on something. She proposed on trying to rewrite history, especially when it comes to Holocaust, when it comes to bringing apart the European Union, as well as aggravating the crimes of inciting anti-Semitism. And now they are witnessing an alarming growth of anti-Semitism in Europe. But there is growth of anti-Semitism as well as the growth of nationalism. But apparently, for some reason, they tie it to the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And it's clear they're trying to avoid answering the question, who is the reason for growth of anti-Semitism and nationalism in Europe? And why? And it was them, the heads of European institutions, who have destroyed the common history of Europe, who started inciting people against one another, started to spread nonsense, even on the history of the Second World War. And this cannot be called other than cynical lies and nonsense, and anything that Ms. von der Leyen says is nothing but that. So I believe it is lies what she says, that they're trying to preserve things tied to Holocaust. But who exactly in European Union is trying to preserve it? Those are just singular countries, but not Brussels as a whole and not the European Union as a whole. Nobody. And Madame von der Leyen says that supposedly the EU is trying to raise awareness on the memorable sites dedicated to Holocaust among the population. That is not true. Perhaps some commemorative plaques or commemorative complexes are being presented by them as cultural objects, but authentic sites, memorial sites, sites that are inextricably linked with the history of the Second World War and with extermination of eliminating people, trying to clear the world of a brown plague. They're being destroyed by them, or they're trying to rewrite history that it's impossible to actually pinpoint what happened. No one has done more than the Brussels elites in order to rewrite history and to tarnish the memory of Soviet soldiers, among whom were Jews. They're waging a war against the memorial sites and the Soviet heritage. It was Brussels who has done everything in order to rewrite history and to truly impose a defeat on the history that is, especially for the Jewish people, refers to what they call Holocaust. That is a horrifying history of how Europeans, who the Red Army first liberated from the Brown Plague and then helped a large number of countries to build brick from brick to rebuild their countries and economically helped. Now they're stomping on the memory of those who liberated them, and now they're mocking history and memories of actual people. There's no gratitude, not a shred of it. Forget about gratitude. But they also have done everything they can in order to contribute to the destruction of historical memory, even when it comes to Holocaust, but also to incite their population to repeating these terrible mistakes. And the High Representative for Foreign Affairs decided not to mention the liberation of Auschwitz camp. That was the launch date in order to announce the January 27th, the International Day of Remembering the Victims of Holocaust. So the date exists, but what it stands for, they don't care for that. As for the dangerous forms of modern anti-Semitism, she mentioned content generated by the AI, but they desecrated the memorials to those who have put out the flame of Holocaust with their own hands. Memorials to the Red Army, to Soviet soldiers. But apparently AI is to blame for that. Perhaps they're using artificial intelligence, and that is why they're trying to criticize themselves. But I believe their heads are not filled with artificial intelligence, but with just empty space. And the true light at the end of the tunnel was the address of the 88 years old Italian who shared the horrors of Auschwitz and recalled that it was Russians who liberated it. We are truly grateful and we pay our respects. That is truly who is keeping the memory alive. That is who has clear mind, clear conscience. A person who truly witnessed those horrors, who is 88 years old and who has carried that knowledge despite everything. She still has enough energy to share it. She has both physical and moral strength to do so. And what is astonishing, when this event was covered at the European Parliament portal, that moment was not there. They are now censoring even victims of Holocaust. They're not allowing them a chance to share their truth. And even when people truly get a chance to share real memories, they edit it out, even from the website. Do you remember how it happened just recently with the Italian mass media, who have asked for an interview with Minister Lavrov and then edited it out? Just compiled fragments, leaving just 5 or 10%. First, they said that there's not enough space on newspaper. Okay, if you don't have enough paper in Italy, at least publish it in full on the website. And then they said there isn't enough space on the website either. And now it seems there's no space for free speech of an Italian citizen who has gone through Holocaust and who has presented real memories of it in European Parliament. Now there is no space for her on the European Parliament website. Is it once again the AI who's to blame for that? No. It's just that they have no shame, no dignity. Thank you. Thank you. Is the Xinhua agency with us? Good afternoon. China, showcasing its commitment to the open policy, stated that it's not just ready to become an international fabric, but international market. How do you assess the significance of the further openness of China in order to support stability and restoration of world economy? And what new opportunities you think do China and Russia share for economic cooperation? Thank you. I believe that the policy conducted by China should be first of all assessed by its citizens. But as for the international context included in your question, I would like to focus on that. Being one of the leading economies of the world, China plays a large role in developing international system. And its orientation on the international demand and growing import from other states is not just a strong base for raising the level standards for Chinese citizens, but it also opens opportunities to enlarge export to other countries and strengthen trans-border contacts and practical ties. For Russia, which is one of the leading trade partners of China, is especially important. We're the leaders on imports of oil And we're also now the leaders on the natural gas. Russian agricultural and food products are in high demand in China, and its import at the end of last year have gone up again. In 2025, the bilateral trade turnover has gone over the mark of $200 billion US, which showcases the stability of Russian-China trade and economic partnership. Thank you. Thank you. Is Belta with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Good afternoon, we are with you. Russian MFA has quickly finished all the procedures of appointing new ambassador to Belarus. And now a new person has arrived in Moscow and has started his duties. So what are Russia's expectations of the new ambassador of Belarus? You see, this is the story that I believe showcases how fast things change. So after receiving an agreement, the newly appointed ambassador of Belarus in Russia already on January 27th arrived to Moscow. And after landing, he immediately went to the traditional meeting to meet with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, with the ambassadors accredited in Moscow, and immediately after that, he handed in the copy of the credential letters to the responsible Deputy Foreign Minister Galuzin, who's responsible for this region. And we've already published the message to the mass media, which allows him to start his duties. And of course, this is due to the unprecedented high intensity of the political dialogue between our brotherly countries, as well as the scale of bilateral cooperation and the depth of international processes within the Allied state. And we believe that due to his high professional experience and his qualities, he can go into detail in the problem of the Russian-Belarusian relations that he's very well aware of. Because for the last 6 years, he was in the position of the Minister of Finance of the Republic of Belarus. And today, January 30th, he will participate in the State of the Council of Eurasian Economic Commission, and on February the 2nd, in the meeting of the Council of Ministers of Allied State. And I would like to... He gets the duties of the Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Belarus within the action of the Allied States, as well as the representative in the Economic Union of CIS within the EEU CIS and CSTO. And our main expectation from our new colleague, if you allow me to say this, due to your question, is of course preserving the long-standing, close, trustworthy, brotherly cooperation between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia and the Belarusian mission in Moscow in order to reinforce friendship and cooperation between our brotherly states and peoples. And allow me to take this chance and, of course, wish the new ambassador all the success on his new position, and we're ready to cooperate productively. I always think about Russia and Belarus. We say that those are brotherly countries. We can also use sisterly countries. I also like this word. Thank you. Thank you. Is Sputnik Uzbekistan with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Salam alaikum. We welcome you from Tashkent. Madam Zakharova, last week, on January 22nd in Moscow, there were consultations in the format of Central Asia and Russia when a discussion was held on the implementation of plan of joint action for 2025-2027. Which areas of the six-way cooperation are of priority for Russia for the upcoming period, and what tangible steps have already been planned in order to implement them together with Central Asian states. I believe that I should start by saying that relations of Russia with Central Asian states, we comment on them systematically. Following our recent comments are based on the principles of strategic partnership and allyship, which oversees cooperation on a wide spectrum of areas, including trade and economic cooperation in the area of transport, energy, healthcare, the sanitary epidemic, welfare of population, cultural humanitarian ties, ecology. So it already makes a list of issues that we respond to in time. As for cooperating in the six-lateral format and implementing a plan of joint action, following the second summit of Central Asia and Russia, which took place on October 9th, 2025 in Dushanbe, then currently finalizing the process of forming working group on the aforementioned areas with the deputy leaders of the relevant ministers and agencies of Russia and Central Asian states that will take place in implementing relevant projects and events in this format. And we're convinced that this cooperation format and collaboration will be a tangible tool in reinforcing our bilateral relations. Thank you. Thank you. Is the Media Corporation of China with us? Yes. Good afternoon. We have two questions. The trilateral talks of Russia, Ukraine, and the U.S., which took place in Abu Dhabi, were the first direct contact since the start of the conflict and was stated as constructive. And the next round is expected for the 1st of February. What are the expectations of Russia from these talks? What are the main obstacles for the progress? And do you believe that this format could be basis for the further resolution of the crisis? You see, as for the past meeting that took place on the 23rd, 24th of January, all the assessment have been given through the administration of the president from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I will allow myself the chance of not commenting the upcoming meeting. I will be sure to do it, but later on. Thank you. And the second question on 26th of January, Central Commandment of the Armed Forces of the U.S. said that the Abraham Lincoln is their zone of responsibility, and also announced the armed forces training round as for the pressure against Iran. How do you assess the steps of the U.S.? How could it affect the situation in the Middle East? You see, just yesterday we've published the interview of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergey Lavrov, to the Turkish mass media, where Minister has stated that there are a lot of prognoses that another attack on Iran is inevitable, but he hopes that the common sense will prevail. He also stated that Russia has friendly contacts with Iran, and we always offer our good services. As for the lowering the degree of situation, we will await the calmness of the situation, as happened in the summer when the objects under the IAEA auspices were attacked. We're ready to contribute, and our colleagues are aware, but I believe you can take a look at that interview and find out for yourself. Thank you so much. Thank you. Is Reuters with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Good afternoon. You've just answered my first question. So my colleague just asked it. So if you allow me, I will pass on to the second question. It has to do with the capture of the Grinch tanker, which took place in the Mediterranean Sea. So the United Kingdom said that it has to do with the fleet transferring Russian oil. So the question, is it true that it was transferring Russian oil? And how is Russia assessing the shipping against these actions? And what is it planning to do to protect its interests if they truly affect us?
We have made comments on this situation on many occasions regarding the detention of vessels flying the flag of various countries. As for the tanker mentioned by you, according to publicly available information, it has no connection with our country at all. I have seen that it was flying the flag of the Comoros Islands, which, according to the International Maritime Organization database, that flag turned out to be inconsistent with the data, the provided data. That's what can be found. Its owner is a company registered in the Marshall Islands, and the tanker's crew, as far as we know, consists of Indian citizens. As for the cargo, I do not know anything about its ownership. So the detained vessel has no connection with our country whatsoever. So I do not know if there is some, all that needs to be commented. Regarding the second part of your question about the protection of civilian shipping, our position remains unchanged and we regularly voice it. So references that are falsely called international coercive actions against any tankers, they are absolutely unfounded. And such unilateral restrictive measures are contrary to international law. They cannot serve as grounds for exercising jurisdiction on the high seas and seizing vessels. The list of international such reasons, such grounds is exhaustive, and unilateral restrictions are not included into this list. If international law is violated with respect to vessels flying our flag, Russia will take all available measures to protect them. I would also like to add, we see the joy of some countries, certain Western countries. Their heads of state, their political figures, experts, how actively they have now started those illegal actions in the sea. How they forget about international law, international maritime law, international maritime convention, and how they managed to do that. In international shipping, economic and civilian, as you have rightly said. I have answered the question before. Fleets approaching other countries. It's so nice, but there is such a children's tale. It's about a person who knows nothing, written by Nosov. It's about a painter who knows nothing. When this character asked his friend for a paint, a brush, and started painting all of his friends, and then invited everyone to visit that exhibition. His paintings, they were not skillful, but they were funny, and when it comes to their own portraits, the Westerners, they were just laughing at how those sanctions measures are developed with regard to our country, how those sanctions are implemented, and how human rights could be ignored in practice, how stories could be invented about the lack of people's rights, and when it reached Greenland, it has become so sad. And apart from those links to international documents, I would request Western countries, they are now just watching with glee how it is developing in the sea, how it is not international law, but the law of the strong determines everything. Not to forget this children's fairy tale about Mr. Know Nothing, and not to ignore the reality. Thank you very much. Is Ukraine.ru with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova, Anna Cherkasova, Ukraine.ru. We have one question. During the International Economic Forum in Davos, Bart de Wever, Belgian Prime Minister, who supports transatlantic unity, said that he no longer considers America an ally and called upon preparations for the trade war with Washington. Maybe the Belgian politician remembered the words of philosopher Gramsci. He said that now the time of monsters is coming, and it's up to Trump to decide whether he wants to be a monster or not. And he said there is a difference between a vessel and a despicable slave. How would you comment on those statements? I think that independent states who act in their national capacity or are part of some voluntary associations, at least stating that they are voluntary unions, they just need to have a choice which dependence to adhere to, whether to be happy or unhappy, and how to treat their own freedom. That's the choice that should be primary for them. And I think before that, we could say, just say that they should have the right as a whole to be free, as they enjoy this right. But these perversions, there are many perversions in the West now. Maybe they do not need this freedom. They just need to keep the choice whether to be free or not free. But I think it's about the end of Europe, the sunset, and maybe even more complicated processes when one country in the EU chooses between dependencies, and not mentioning that it is no longer a sovereign independent state. In my opinion, it's not some slip of the tongue, but it's just calling, naming things as they are. They just underline this, this political life of the Western elites they have highlighted. They can be considered free, and they have this right to treat those criteria of freedom or not freedom. Sometimes providing indulgence connected with freedom, media freedom, freedom of speech and human rights. But others, they should just seek the greatest, allegedly greatest level, the summit they have reached, and everyone else has not reached. Now we see that they admit they are not free. They are either vassals or slaves. And all those statements, they have not been somehow denied. They just accept that this is a fact. And this acceptance, it just ends everything and puts an end, and it makes it impossible for them to name Western Europeans, to put a crown on their head of some special liberty and the right to treat someone else's liberty. They do not have that right. So let them just treat somehow their state of lack of freedom. Thank you very much, Madam Zakharova. Thank you. Is Bolt News with us? Yes. Hello, Madam Zakharova. the Olympic Committee has published a methodology before the Olympic Games banning communication with athletes from Russia and Belarus. Does Russia plan to file a lawsuit against the Latvian Olympic Committee in the Court of Arbitration for Sport? And if not, why? If so, when? And regarding the politicization of sports, does Russia plan to raise this issue at the UN? So it's just nationalism having reached the level of neo-Nazism. You know, it has no relation to true sports, to conflicts that are on the planet. It's just another thing. It's literally neo-Nazism. When people are denied communication on national basis. I do not know how that could be done in today's world. Maybe the next step is genetic expertise. When a person will need to provide some medical document about his nationality, in many cases I see such an approach. Someone says, I have more blood of some nation. Someone appeals to his ancestor, to his relatives. Someone now citing some scientific data now, and that gives the right. It's not about citizenship. For example, if a person is a citizen, he has the right to participate in elections and governance. It's about ethnic-cultural, national grounds. So it's one of the facets of this trouble that has happened on our planet, is nationalism, neo-Nazism, when people are denied communication on the national basis. Actually, traditionally, sports is about uniting nations and peoples. Olympic Games must be open to all athletes without exception, regardless of citizenship, race, ethnicity, gender, or political beliefs. We view such initiatives by the Baltic states, particularly Latvia, as yet another glaring example of old-fashioned Russophobia. It's nationalism that has reached the level of neo-Nazism, I would repeat that. We regularly draw attention of the international human rights community to facts of discrimination against Russian athletes. We send corresponding appeals to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism of the UN Human Rights Council, and the UN Committee on Social, Economic and Cultural Rights. We used regular sessions of the Human Rights Council as well as the Universal Periodic Review procedure. We intend to raise this issue during the annual review cycle that will take place in May this year. We intend to protect the rights of athletes and facilitate their return to international sports arena. Actually, the Ministry of Sport and the relevant officials in our country who are engaged in the problems of sports, they have the primary role in these issues. Thank you. Thank you. Is El Mayadin with us? Yes. Hello, Madam Zakharova. What support could Russia provide to Syria at this stage? Yes, actually, Syria for our country is a traditional partner for us in Middle East region. Russia has always assisted Syrian people when they needed that. Now we see that this country has entered a new stage of its historic development. It needs assistance in restoring its economy after a military and political crisis, and we are ready to provide that to Syrian people and government, overcoming those problems primarily of economic nature. Those issues were discussed on the 28th of January during talks between President Putin and President Ahmed Shara of Syria. Special attention was given to further expansion of trade and economic cooperation. At the end of negotiations, our president noted that trade turnover has grown recently, and there are prospects of joint projects in medicine, sports, and building construction. Such aspects are developed within the framework of a permanent Russian-Syrian Commission. On the 28th of October 2025, there was another meeting of that commission. On the 16th, 19th of November, Russian interagency delegation visited Damascus. It was a Russian commission on trade and scientific cooperation, and there were meetings in Moscow on the 23rd of December. It was dialogue of relevant ministries and economic cooperation of both countries. This dialogue is to continue. Thank you. Is Rudolf Channel with us? Yes, hello. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Thank you for this opportunity. I represent Rudolf Channel. Also about Syria. What specific steps can Russia take to ensure the humanitarian shipments for Kurdish population in the northeast of Syria, and the ceasefire, the fire that is continuing despite agreements? Also, regarding Syria, is the withdrawal of Russian contingent from Kamishli somehow connected with the general reduction of military forces? And was this issue discussed during the meeting with the Syrian side, the meeting of President Putin on the 28th of January? And the third question, does Russia regard the opportunity to become a guarantor, a mediator between Damascus and Kurds regarding their future constitutional rights? Was this issue raised during negotiations? Yes, the developments were discussed during the meeting on the 28th of January in the Kremlin. It's about the meeting between the President of Russia and the President of Syria. We are concerned that the ceasefire is not observed, and there are reports about fightings. Of major importance, it's of major importance to ensure the security of civilians and providing protection for civilians. Regarding the Kurds' rights, we have repeatedly voiced our position on this account. It has not changed. It's about the long-term sustainable stabilization in the northeast of Syria is to take place with taking into account the interests of all the ethno-confessional groups, including the Kurds, of course. We believe it is important to observe the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria, and we welcome the adoption of the presidential decree in Syria number 13 of the 16th of January 2026 on guarantees of the Kurds' rights, and the agreement of the 18th of January 2026 on the comprehensive ceasefire. Thank you. Is News.ru you with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. We are here. We have two questions today. The first is about Serbia. Alexander Vučić, the president of Serbia, said that he was offered to close Russian media outlets in exchange for support in Euro integration, and the Serbian leader declined that proposal. So why do you think they are using those dirty, evidently dirty methods to stifle the freedom of speech abroad? So actually that's the essence. Why are they requiring that from Serbia or from other countries in order to make this country more vulnerable? And without alternative sources of information for this country to use only Western media outlets, for example, and be vulnerable. As we see now, media outlets, they just express the ideas of Western special services, and they just support the color revolutions and the change of regime. That's why they need to close media outlets to make the country, namely Serbia, who will lack those media outlets, make it more vulnerable in general. You need to understand that it's a deception, that you will do something and you will get something in exchange. It's a deception in order to stimulate the adoption of some actions necessary for the West, saying that in exchange in an obligatory manner you will do that, you just do this first step.
So what are we talking about? I've given an example today that Serbia has been waiting long for this Euro integration, and it's been going on 20 years, and they keep talking about new demands. Do this, refuse to do this, close this, open that. Please readjust that. And how much has Serbia already done, or Albania? How many countries? Montenegro. They keep doing it, and the situation is nevertheless the same. So the tactics of Europe in order to alienate their citizens from alternative opinions, and they have been gaining ground over the years, this tendency. We're seeing the growing tendency in order to suppress any kind of different thinking with censorship, with the prohibition of mass media that criticize the current course of Brussels. And they keep using terms of stability and democracy, and they try to control the media sphere, to exert control over journalists in order to control the information field. And it's not just control over the field, but it's over-encompassing field, so that this information field was not just under the watchful eye, but that it would be managed despite the freedom of speech and democratic principles. The EU censorship has reached such a scope that even their Pacific colleagues was even criticized by the J.D. Vance at the Munich conference on the issues of politics, security, that the mockery of freedom of speech is taking place in the political sphere, where it's seen in the pressure of political forces, in the refusal of any cooperation with them, and allowing any political figures. There's even legal persecution, and they even review the non-conforming results of the elections. You've already seen the situation in Romania. I believe even the US noticed it, because it's the mockery of common sense, and these approaches are being imposed by the EU to the third parties. They're ready to follow the censorship of the media sphere and the political sphere. They have turned into one of the criteria following which is necessary in order to build the relationships with Brussels, where they gain financial support from Brussels, or where they receive guarantees that they will be left alone for a while, that they will be left alone, and none of the matters will be taken against them. It's nothing but a horror. Brussels doesn't get enough by stripping Europeans of access to information. They're trying to deprive them of freedom of thought and the ability to form their own opinions. And basically, they're already implementing AI into everything, into the everyday equipment, into the gadgets, into applications. So it's no longer even necessary to withhold the mass media because everything will be implemented through AI. Under the guise of battling misinformation, they're imposing politically correct cliches. And even in the US, under the guise of any kinds and forms of democratic society, people have been imposed with the myths of gender orientation, transformation, identity, and so on. And in a second, everything has changed, settings have been readjusted, but people continue to live with the trauma. Children have been traumatized, and how to live with that, they forget to mention. And the peak of that censorship was the introduced within the entire Russian politics refusal of tourism services in order to organize trips to Russia. And the goal is clear, so that people could not see with their own eyes how we live. So they would marinate in this false narrative filled with lies that is fueled by the anti-Russian propaganda. They're using illegitimate unilateral sanctions against mass media or singular journalists, representatives of media circles that they consider to be uncomfortable. And all of this is a matter of routine. Just take a look at how many journalists, under the pretext of working for mass media that are under sanctions, are being deported from a country. Who exactly put them under sanctions? What pretext was used to introduce these sanctions? What does that have to do with the journalists and their work? They're staying silent about it. They just repeat it as mantra. They just say that it's under sanctions. What kind of sanctions are you talking about? You were pioneering for the freedom of speech and for absolute human rights. And when you say absolute, that means that none of them can be under sanctions. They're journalists. And then it turns out that it's just until the next moment arises. And of course, first and foremost, under these restrictions, they send Russians, Russian-speaking compatriots, journalists, and just yesterday they introduced a new portion of restrictions. And apparently they're supposedly guilty for publicly defending their view of public events that is not comfortable to EU officials. So if you are curious about the freedom of speech, that is your answer. Thank you, Madam Zakharova. And the second question is for Hungary and Slovakia. They announced their plans of introducing legal actions for the prohibition of supplying Russian gas to these countries. So what do you think? Why do European authorities, who supposedly protect democratic, why do they ignore these appeals? And do you believe there's any chance of reaching justice? You see, it's not them ignoring the approaches of Budapest and Bratislava. They're trying to sink the European Union as a whole. And it sounds weird because it's the EU officials who are doing it, but they are playing against the European interest. They're trying truly to bring to the bottom, being as this hard rock hanging from the feet of the citizens, trying to sink this financial or digital literacy by imposing illegal, illogical decisions on their people. And those who stand against it, they try to break them apart. They try to sink them even further. And they would stop at nothing, even when the countries scream how much they don't want to do that it is lethal to them, that their citizens will suffer, and you can see it for yourself. Can we speak about the dissatisfaction of Budapest and Bratislava? No, it's a moan, a scream a plea for their own rights. And in order to agree on these aforementioned measures, they truly required them to perform insane acrobatics. They needed a new pack of measures when a truly legal measure only requires a legal majority. So it speaks for itself. Not to mention that a lot of other basic principles were violated. They should acquire the same principle to renouncing sanctions. They always refer to the consensus rule, but how can everything be combined in the same heads? I'm not even talking about the brains, just the heads. It's unclear. As for the matters of deciding the energy balance are in the hands of the EU states. Brussels had no care either for what kind of financial responsibilities would arise from replacing Russian energy carriers for these countries, and when working out the legal barriers, what kind of compensations would arise for European carriers. When breaking apart the contracts would bring new legal obligations and the obligation to pay the fares. And what about the fact that going against Russia is far above the interest of other countries? As for the appeal and how it could help them reach justice, I believe I am not capable of answering that. They should be asked that question. They've always showed the political engagement in affairs that have to do with our country. It's a long process. Those are long processes, and usually it takes about 2 years. And this is a decision that has to do with present, with the upcoming year. And it's important to understand that hearing the appeals would not automatically suspend their legality. That is their so-called democracy. Thank you so much for your answers. Thank you. Is Lenta.ru with us? Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have only one question. Kyrgyzstan have appealed to the court as for the health care insurance of working migrants. And supposedly, Russia refuses to give the health care insurance to the migrant families. And it's expected that the decision will be announced in 2 weeks. Is Russia holding talks with Bishkek on this track? And what is the nature of this issue? First of all, thank you so much for phrasing this correctly, because a lot of mass media have written that supposedly Kyrgyzstan have appealed to the EU with the truly lawsuit. This is not a lawsuit. Kyrgyzstan have confirmed it as well. Bishkek in November 2022 sent the appeal on explaining the norms of the EU when it comes to obligatory health care. And this procedure supposes the consultative decision that is recommendatory in nature. So we're awaiting the position of the court on this issue. This work has been done over a long time, and there are different phrasing of the positions of the Treaty of May 29, 2014. And there are different practices in the countries of the Big Five. For example, in Belarus, don't have the obligatory health care. In Armenia, these mechanisms have just been launched. And in Kyrgyzstan, the systems are operating, but they're different from our experience. It's true that these healthcare insurances are given to the workers but not their families, so we're awaiting the commentary from the relevant agencies, that is the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Economic Development of our country. Thank you. Thank you. Is Anadolu with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Anadolu. We have a question regarding Iran According to mass media, the US are planning a targeted attack on the high-ranking officials and commanders of Iran that Washington considers responsible for the death of protesters in Iran. Have the Iranian officials requested aid from Russia for protection, or has Russia received any kind of request like that from Iran? We comment on the Russian-Iranian agenda regularly. We have published a range of official statements, and I have nothing to add to that. The position hasn't changed, but I can state that within the intense political dialogue between Moscow and Tehran, a lot of attention is paid to the development of the situation around this country. And if you allow another question as for Iran, and the next day Iran plans to military training. And according to the mass media, Russian and Chinese military officers will participate in those. Could you comment on that? That is the prerogative of our Ministry of Defense. I can pass over your question to them, help you connect with them. And on my part, I will do anything I can. But if we have any question, we will make sure to share that as well. Thank you. Thank you. Is Newsfront Bulgaria with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Can you hear me? Yes. If you allow me, 2 questions. First one has to do with international shipment. I heard the question of my colleague from Reuters. I would like to quote the Bloomberg edition that stated that 14 European states, with the UK, Germany, Sweden, and so on, have launched an open warning towards the tankers of the Russian trade fleet in the Baltic and the Northern Seas. That along the sea routes that are the only exits for the large centers of the oil export of the West. How could you comment this information and the warnings of this kind with this phrase? There's the word opus. Perhaps it's somehow derogatory, but I believe I cannot find a better word because we truly saw this opus. And on January 26th, it was published. 14 states of the Baltic and North Seas have joined in signing that. We're taking a detailed look together with relevant agencies, taking a look at what it contains. And we believe that these warnings presented in such a way containing baseless accusations against sovereign states are unacceptable. Desire of European colleagues to always blame all the misgiving on someone else is understandable in general, because they cannot blame themselves for this situation. But we would suggest, instead of accusing our country and making threats to the shipments, to perhaps take a look at the reasons of the issues, and by them introducing illegal unilateral measures. And we can clearly see how nobody other than those 27 countries, nobody solidifies it as international. It's just internal sanctions of an inner circle. International law only sees sanctions internationals as those that are approved by the UN Security Council. Once again, the Westerners are making up the rules as they go, but they also understand how it crumbles, continuing to strike themselves. They're showing weakness of the European legal position. or it should be said the lack thereof. And it's not just them being selective, it's full disbalance in respect and their regard for laws and norm. No norms, no understanding that the law is the same for everyone, no understanding of the law. So it's no surprise that until present, Europeans who have detained ships under the guise of sanctions were forced to let them go. We will continue to follow the situation if this warning leads to any active actions from its authors, and we will use any methods we have in order to react in response to the risks and threats to the ships under the Russian legal norms.
Thank you very much. And if you allow me one more question. Yes, of course. Lieutenant General Gerald Funke stated in the Times interview that Russia allegedly would attack NATO within 3 years and called on Germany to prepare for a major war. Is such a statement a form of incitement and programming of certain countries to actually unleash a global conflict? And why is this rhetoric ongoing, do you think? As far as I understand, this Bundeswehr political figure, he's not wide known. And I need to precise that maybe he is no longer in office. But through such figures, they convey some provocative thoughts. So let me just find out some details on that, what specifically has been said, and I will provide comments to you. But what is for sure, the West Europe are acting as a provocator, as an instrument. And Western Europe has made it an inciter of another global conflict. There is no doubt about that. We have together commented upon the situation about some ultimatums about illegal actions. It's just total ignorance of international law and some legal norms. It's just not decent to invent themselves some methods of influence and then to coerce others to implement and to follow what they have fantasized themselves in some additional hybrid scales about which very few people can tell anything. It's just absurd. It's totally absurd. The rules they are proposing for life, they cannot just adhere to some rules or to provide it in writing. They do not want, they do not have any possibility for that. Or to tell about their own commitments. They're just stepping on their own rake. And the situation around Greenland is just a blatant example. It's just command administrative system that is presented as some community of democratic countries, but actually their interests as democratic states, they are ignored. And what is today, more and more provocative actions are taken in order to set fire on this EU space that is already in fire. So I will provide my commentary later. Thank you. Thank you. Is Big Asia with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova, Ina Fernandez, Big Asia channel. We have one question. This week it has become known that India and the EU have concluded a free trade agreement this week that they have been unable to agree on since 2007. And there is a negotiation underway on a free trade zone between India and the EAEU. Is there any chance to sign such an agreement this year? Actually, there was the first round of negotiations on November 26, 28, 2025. It is premature to discuss any specific time frame for signing this document, but at the same time, we note the mutual interest of both parties in achieving the result as soon as possible, and the interest in negotiations is mutual, and the next round is scheduled in the very near future. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Virelk with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. I have two questions today. The first one, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has recently stated, yesterday he also made such a statement, he asked Russia to expedite the decision on restoring the railway sections in Armenia leading to the borders of with Azerbaijan and Turkey. It does not concern the section through Megri that is to be built as part of the TRIP project. So Nikol Pashinyan also stated that if the Russian government refuses, the Armenian government is prepared to remove these lines from the concession management of the South Caucasus Railway and carry out restoration at its own expense. What is Russia's position on this issue? The Russian side is in constant contact with the Armenian partners, and all the requests from Yerevan are promptly processed, and this TRIP project, we confirm our readiness to explore possible options, taking into account the unique expertise of Russian railways, but the development of this initiative is at its early stage. So we need to to hold consultations with the participation of all the interested agencies. So my next question. The CSTO partners refused to meet their obligations before us, according to Pashinyan, and they were refusing to ship equipment and arms for worth billions of dollars. It was an existential threat for Armenia. It was obvious the decision has been taken to destroy our statehood. I do not understand who has taken the decision to destroy the statehood. Actually, it was a direct quote. I think it's just some words that are incompatible. So, does he accuse Russia of destruction of Armenian statehood? Maybe it's a wrong quotation. Let us precise that. Regarding the territorial integrity, it's not exactly clear what is meant. It was said in the context of the situation around Nagorno-Karabakh. I do not remember this territory being declared legally part of Armenia. I only remember Nikol Pashinyan came there and danced there, but I remember that, but some legal recognition, inclusion into Armenia as a state, I do not know anything about it. Maybe you have heard something. It's 2022. It was that attack and international recognition. So let us precise what is meant, because actually there are many things that are unknown in this quotation, because then we will understand how we can comment on that. I do not understand which threats by this CSTO against the Armenian statehood. I do not understand what is meant. Maybe something else is meant. I cannot comment on the quotation that has so many unclear issues. So let us precise and then comment on that. Thank you. Thank you. Is the voice of the fatherland with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Vladimir Golovanov, the Voice of the Fatherland is with you. Our question. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that Europe is not capable to ensure security without the US and is dependent on American arms to support Ukraine. Do these revelations indicate that the so-called EU strategic autonomy policy has completely failed and the key security decisions for Europe, including arms supplies, are made by Washington? Thank you. You know, I would be hesitant to qualify those remarks made by Secretary General Rutte in the European Parliament on the 26th of January as to dismiss them as revelations. It's such a public attempt maybe to sober up somehow those leaders of the alliance who, taking into account the Greenland situation, decided to seriously consider building a security system in Europe without the United States. Europeans were made aware who is the boss in the house, and in some aspect, Rutte's statements have become some revelation. What has been mentioned, Davis, actually the Western Europe, it has harmed itself, it has tied itself, not by law and the right, but by illegal actions and declining to comply with the law and the examples it had provided to others as well. The decision taken in The Hague to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, decision made in The Hague summit, it testifies of the compliance by the Europeans. It's not a bad thing or a good thing, it's the position of the Western European bloc, this union of states. Its lack of understanding how their steps can lead to other steps and what's their logics, where they are moving, in which direction. There's the same issue with arms supplies to the Kiev regime. They were told to purchase those weapons from the Americans, and they will do that despite the statistical data they have. And then they started to hastily implement the new directives. They do not even think it will deprive their own military-industrial complex enterprises of profits. What is that? Is it some weakness or people who have been rooted into the Brussels democracy in order to just decrease this EU role and make it just a burden? So let the political scientists and observers make conclusions, but other figures also testify about that, are a testimony of the European Union just losing any understanding of where it is moving, in which direction. Thank you very much. And my second question. In case actual control is established over Greenland, Washington will develop this version about the Kekele Ridge. If you allow me, I would not comment upon such hypothetical issues. I will convey them to experts and we will discuss that, but it's not the format of a briefing. It's maybe a format of some reference material. on a specified topic, or we need to be talking about some facts and not hypothetical conclusions. Otherwise, we will become a talk show and not a briefing or a press conference. Thank you very much. Is author I with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Author I is here. I would thank you personally about your position on Alexander Gaponenko case. It's a shock for human rights community, for those who deal with the Baltic states. It's just fury. Our fury with regard to this event, those actions. And now on the developments in Syria, it's wide-scale competition, and regarding relations with Turkey, it's a difficult period. How would you assess the long-term prospects for dialogue with Ankara, and how does Moscow see an opportunity to use the Russian-Turkish format to reduce tensions in the Middle East and the Black Sea region? Turkey is our neighbor and a long-standing partner. We have mutual beneficial projects, and our position is consistent. We have multi-billion-dollar contracts in gas and nuclear energy. The Russian-Turkish Blue Stream gas pipeline is operating, and the Turk Stream ensures reliable energy supplies to residents of Turkey and consumers in several European countries as well. It's also a nuclear area. EAEU construction, intensive contacts on regional issues, including the situation in the Middle East, Syria, Libya, and Afghanistan. We're confident that close Russian-Turkish dialogue makes a significant contribution to strengthening international security, also in our common Black Sea region and the Middle East settlement. Thank you very much. Against the backdrop of military increase of military presence of the United States in the Indo-Pacific region and tensions in India-China relations. Do you see some role for yourself, for Russia? The role of an external balancer and mediator in relations both with New Delhi and Beijing. There is already such term, smaller geometry, and a number of countries are forming military political alliances in small geometry structures. We see growing conflicts, militarization of Asia, growing the scale of NATO military potential. So proponents of such approaches are undertaking efforts to fragment the region's security space. It's all provoking the emergence of new dividing lines and flashpoints. It's like swinging some very tight, very reliable structure, and to use some weak points for that in order to turn this reliable, good quality construction into something that is not reliable, that is to break. And such structures as SCO, they will work on the basis of principles of security, trust, and cooperation. They have such an opportunity, and they resolve priority tasks on the Eurasian space and counter the growing threats in security. In Tianjin, the president of the Russian Federation underlined the SCO growing role in the growth of cooperation and trust. The heads of states, SCO states, signed agreements on a universal center in Tashkent and anti-drug center in Dushanbe. A priority vector, as set out in the SCO development strategy up to 2035, is the system of equal and indivisible security in Eurasia. The foundation for such partnership would be the Greater Eurasian Partnership. It implies close multilateral cooperation and the alignment of national integration initiatives. It's a joint work of member states, Russia, India and China on strategic documents. It motivates the organization's members to cooperate in a secure environment. This opens up additional opportunities for the SCO's further progressive work in all areas: politics, security, economics, cultural, humanitarian ties. Externally, the SCO platform is open to all states and it's like-minded states. Their number continues to grow. The SCO family includes countries from all the geographical zones of the Eurasian space. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend. Thank you likewise. Is Embassy live with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Yes, it's actually good evening, I think. We have two questions. Let us start with the first one. The principle according to which the use of force is the prerogative of the UN Security Council is disputed by a whole number of countries. So does Russia think that it has a moral and political right to review this principle in the circumstances when it is ignored by others, in order to prevent direct threats by its borders and threats to its interests? I would just a little bit avoid this topic today, because I think that this formulation, this wording is incorrect. You say that some countries, they abandon this formula, but for how long? Maybe they started 5 years ago, 20 years ago, regarding Iran, regarding Yugoslavia and Libya, the Middle Eastern, many territories, Africa and so on. It has been the case always. And the question is, how would we like to, what would we like the world, how would we like to see it? We have some possibilities to improve. It's not the right of the strong. It's the right of the hooligan, the right of the violator, the right of someone who does not have conscience, who is just insolent and not respecting the authority, law and tradition.
Or perhaps we will live in a world where there is law. Of course, there will be no 100% justice, but there will be understanding of it and a strive for this justice. We will live in the world where there are different centers of development that have a chance to use their own efforts, hard work, opportunities to implement their potential. Or we will live in the world where, as the Western Europe stating through the Belgian state authority, to choose between non-freedom and non-freedom, between the slave keeper and the slave, and only have the same guideline, the stage of freedom, fully forgetting to operate from the term of freedom as the basic principle enshrined everywhere in the international law and the traditional values, the philosophical values. This is what we're talking about. we're capable of responding, we're capable of protecting our interests. We have all the opportunities and basis for that, starting with the Constitution and with laws and the acts of the law. We're doing it according to the international law and not just based on our intuition and because we're nowhere right. We always apply to the international law. That is the global question. It's not the question of today. In renouncing international law, always people try to do that. There hasn't been a single vital issue, aside from maybe the Second World War, where people have burned themselves enough, and that shock of pain made them follow the international system, but then they went back on their ways. So as for what matters, what kind of world will we live in, and not just about what kind of trends we're witnessing. They have been around since the beginning of time. Great answer of a smart politician. I am an official. In the context of the Year of Unity of People in Russia and the action of traditional values, how are our foreign diplomatic missions planning to promote this abroad? Do you believe it's the cultural and historical heritage and not the political discussion that is more convincing in order to establish dialogue with those who preserve their interest in Russia? Undoubtedly, making 2026 the Year of Unity of Peoples will be an additional imperative to hold these events, but we hold these events systematically. Our embassies, general consulates, and permanent representatives, and Russia-Türkiye with its representatives abroad, have been hosting numerous events in order to preserve traditional values, even among our compatriots. In 2025, there have been over 2,000. Of course, that's a symbolic number, whether it's less or more. I'm just painting you a picture of how it is, and it will continue in 2026. Keeping in mind the Year of Unity of Russia, and it's one of the 17 traditional values according to the presidential decree of November 9th, 2025, the Decree 809 on the state policy of preserving cultural, spiritual values of Russia. What kind of events are these? These are the events that have been held in different formats, timed with state dates, the Victory Day, the Day of Family, the Day of Slavic Scripture, the Day of People's Unity, and many others. And abroad, with the active participation of representatives of our diaspora, there are different concerts, marches, roundtables, conferences, meetings, mass actions, and award ceremonies. A large number of events, not to say tours or other modern ways, have to do with digital diplomacy. As for the bridge between peoples, you're right, it's the culture, the historical and cultural heritage uniting people all over the world. And the common values as love, truth, goodwill. I could go on forever, and all of this reflected in the art, in culture, and literature are at the basis of what we should be basing our relations with foreign partners on. In 2022, after the presidential decree, we have agreed on the humanitarian policy abroad, which states that culture contributes to the true understanding of Russia abroad, to not allowing the rewriting of ideology, which is necessary in order to build a constructive dialogue, overcome any disagreements in the world. But we have something to strive for, that's just putting it lightly, so we will work actively in this direction. Thank you so much. Thank you. I now say goodbye to everyone, and as it's Friday, I wish everyone great, calm weekend. Wish you all the best. Thank you. Thank you.